She disappeared the day he remarried her best friend. Lena Hart became a ghost in her own life, invisible at galas where she once belonged, serving champagne to women wearing her old jewelry. But one night, in a room full of people who refused to see her, someone did. Marco De Luca didn't just notice her. He claimed her with a single glance. And when a man like that decides you're worth seeing, invisibility is no longer an option. It's a death sentence. If you want to know what happens when the discarded wife catches the eye of the city's most dangerous man, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far Lena's story travels. The tray was heavy. Lena Hart's wrists ached from balancing crystal flutes filled with champagne she'd never be able to afford, her feet screaming inside second-hand heels that pinched with every step. The ballroom of the Sinclair Grand Hotel shimmered with opulence, chandeliers dripping light like diamonds, marble floors polished to mirrors, and guests draped in wealth so casual it looked boring on them. Lena moved through the crowd like smoke, invisible, forgettable, exactly as she needed to be. "Champagne," she murmured to a woman in emerald silk, her voice soft enough not to intrude. The woman took a glass without looking at her, turning back to her companion mid-laugh. Lena's smile stayed fixed, professional, empty. She'd perfected that smile in the 18 months since her divorce, the kind that said, "I'm here to serve, not to exist." It was safer that way. She wound through clusters of executives and socialites, their conversations a blur of stock portfolios and vacation homes. Once she'd stood among them. Once she'd worn gowns like theirs, laughed at the same hollow jokes, pretended the champagne tasted better than it did. But that life had ended the day her husband's affair became public knowledge, the day he'd chosen her former best friend over 18 years of marriage. Now, Lena catered their parties. "Excuse me." A man's hand brushed her elbow, accidental, impersonal. She stepped aside automatically, letting him pass without acknowledgement. That was the trick to this job. Be present, but not there. Move like furniture. Smile like wallpaper. Her manager's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Lena, VIP lounge needs service, North Corridor, 3rd floor." She pressed the tiny microphone clip to her collar. "Copy that." The VIP lounge, of course. That's where the real power congregated, the ones who didn't need to prove anything to anyone, who attended galas like this out of obligation rather than aspiration. Lena had only been up there twice before. The tips were generous, but the atmosphere made her skin crawl. Too much money. Too much danger hiding behind expensive suits. She refilled her tray in the service corridor, her reflection catching in the polished brass of the cart. Dark hair twisted into a severe bun, minimal makeup, a black uniform designed to erase femininity. She barely recognized herself anymore. The woman who'd once spent hours choosing the perfect dress for events like this had been replaced by someone who needed to disappear. Better invisible than pitied. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor was mercifully empty. Lena closed her eyes, breathing deeply. Just 3 more hours. 3 more hours, and she'd collect her paycheck, take the late bus home to her studio apartment in a neighborhood she'd never heard of 2 years ago, and collapse into bed too exhausted to dream. That was survival now. That was enough. It had to be. The VIP lounge sprawled across the entire north wing, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, leather furniture that probably cost more than her annual salary, lighting so subtle it felt like dusk even at 9 p.m. A handful of guests occupied the space, their voices low and controlled. Power didn't need volume. Lena approached a small group near the bar, her tray perfectly balanced. "Champagne." Finally, a silver-haired man in an immaculate tuxedo plucked 2 glasses, handing one to his companion without thanking her. Lena moved on. She was refilling empty glasses on a side table when she felt it, that peculiar prickle at the base of her skull, the animal awareness of being watched. Her hands faltered for just a second before muscle memory took over. She didn't look up. She'd learned that lesson early in this job. Eye contact invited conversation, and conversation invited recognition, and recognition invited questions she couldn't afford to answer. But the weight of that gaze didn't lift. Lena finished her task, turning smoothly toward the next cluster of guests. Her peripheral vision caught him then. A man standing alone near the windows, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a tumbler of what looked like whiskey. He wasn't looking at the view, he was looking at her. "Don't engage, keep moving." She angled toward a group of women near the fireplace, her smile automatic. Champagne? No, thank you, dear. The dismissal was polite but absolute. Lena nodded, already turning away when that voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade through silk. You. She froze. The word hadn't been loud, but it carried weight, command wrapped in velvet. Every instinct screamed at her to keep walking, to pretend she hadn't heard, but her body betrayed her, turning incrementally toward the sound. The man by the window was closer now, though she hadn't seen him move. How had he crossed that distance so silently? Sir? Her voice came out steady, professional. A small victory. He was tall. She registered that first. Broad shoulders filling out a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car had before the repo company took it. Dark hair touched with silver at the temples, sharp jaw, and eyes that Lena's breath caught. His eyes weren't just looking at her. They were seeing her, actually seeing her, the way no one had in so long she'd forgotten what that felt like. Not looking through her or past her, but directly into her, dissecting and assessing with an intensity that made her want to step back. She didn't. Some stubborn pride she'd thought was dead kept her rooted. Champagne? She offered, lifting her tray. Professional, detached, safe. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Not amusement, something darker. I don't drink champagne. Of course. She started to turn away. What's your name? The question stopped her mid-step. Guests didn't ask servers their names. They didn't engage beyond the transaction of service. And something about this man, the way he stood, the way the space around him seemed to bend in deference, told her he knew that rule better than anyone. Lena. The truth slipped out before she could catch it, before she could offer the standard deflection. She cursed herself internally. Lena. He repeated it like he was testing the weight of it, the shape. You don't belong here. Her spine stiffened. I'm with the catering company, sir. If there's an issue with the service, that's not what I meant. His voice was low, almost gentle, but something in it made her pulse spike. This wasn't the casual condescension she'd grown used to from wealthy guests. This was something else, something that felt like being examined under a microscope. I should continue my rounds, Lena said carefully, taking a small step back. Enjoy your evening. She turned before he could respond, moving toward the opposite side of the lounge with measured calm, even though her heart was hammering. Behind her, she felt that gaze following, tracking her movement like a predator watching prey. Don't look back. Don't engage. Do your job and leave. But 20 minutes later, when she returned to the bar to refill her tray, there was a business card waiting on the polished granite surface. Heavy cardstock. Expensive. Just a name, Marco DeLuca, and a phone number. No title, no company, nothing else. Lena stared at it, her hand hovering over the card. He told me to make sure you got that. The bartender, a young man she vaguely recognized from other events, looked nervous. Said it was important. Who is he? The question escaped before she could stop it. The bartender's eyes widened slightly. You seriously don't know? Should I? He glanced around, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. Marco DeLuca owns half this city. Real estate, construction, shipping, other things people don't talk about in public. He's not someone you say no to. Something cold slithered down Lena's spine. I didn't say yes to anything. Didn't have to. The bartender straightened, already moving away to serve another guest. He decided. That's how it works with men like that. Lena picked up the card with trembling fingers, then set it back down like it had burned her. She didn't need this. Didn't need him, whoever he was. She needed to finish her shift, get paid, and maintain the careful invisibility that kept her safe. But when she turned to leave, Marco DeLuca was standing 10 feet away, watching her with that same unsettling intensity. Their eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't approach, just held her gaze with a certainty that made her feel stripped bare, every defense she'd built suddenly fragile as paper. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into a private corridor she hadn't noticed before. Lena stood frozen, her breath shallow, the card still lying on the bar like a challenge, like a threat, like a promise. She left it there, 3 days passed before Lena let herself think about Marco DeLuca again. The morning after the gala, she'd woken in her cramped studio apartment with sunlight streaming through blinds she couldn't afford to replace, her body aching from standing in those terrible heels. She'd made coffee in the cheap machine that sputtered and complained, eaten toast that was mostly crust because she'd forgotten to buy bread again, and gone to her day job at a dry cleaner 6 blocks away. Normal. Safe. Invisible. But at night, alone in the dark, she kept seeing those eyes, kept hearing that voice saying her name like it meant something, kept feeling the weight of being truly seen for the first time in 18 months. It terrified her. On the 4th day, her phone rang during her lunch break. Unknown number. Lena stared at it, her sandwich forgotten. She almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Hello? Lena Hart. Not a question. That voice, dark and certain. You didn't call. Her hand tightened on the phone. I don't know who this is. A pause, and she could hear the smile in his response. Yes, you do. She should hang up, block the number, forget this ever happened. Instead, she found herself saying, How did you get my number? Does it matter? Yes. Her voice came out sharper than intended. It matters very much when a stranger calls me using information I didn't provide. I'm not a stranger, Lena. We met. We spoke. You know my name. Knowing your name doesn't make you less of a stranger. Fair enough. There was something like approval in his tone now. Have dinner with me, tomorrow night. No. Why not? The question was so genuinely curious, so stripped of assumption, that it caught her off guard. Why not? Because she'd learned to be invisible. Because men with power and money took what they wanted and discarded it when they were done. Because her ex-husband had taught her that being seen meant being vulnerable, and vulnerable meant being destroyed. I don't know you, she said finally. That's the point of dinner, to know each other. I'm not interested in whatever this is. What do you think this is? Lena closed her eyes, pressing her fingers against the bridge of her nose. I think you're a man who's used to getting what he wants. I think you saw someone you found momentarily interesting and decided to pursue it. I think you'll lose interest the moment I become complicated. And I think I don't have the energy for any of it. Silence stretched between them. She waited for the click of disconnection, for the anger or dismissal that usually came when she said no to men who thought they were entitled to yes. Instead, Marco said quietly, What if you're wrong? I'm not. Prove it. One dinner. If I'm everything you think I am, you'll have confirmation and I'll leave you alone. If I'm not, he let the sentence hang, unfinished. You might find yourself surprised. I don't like surprises. I know. Something in the way he said it made her pulse quicken. That's why you work jobs where you're invisible. That's why you've built walls so high you think they're protecting you. But they're not, Lena. They're suffocating you. Her breath caught. You don't know anything about me. I know you didn't take my card, but you remember every word written on it. I know you're standing in the break room of a dry cleaner's on 5th and Market, eating a sandwich that's mostly bread because protein is expensive. I know you take the bus because your car was repossessed 7 months ago. I know your ex-husband remarried your former best friend, and you weren't invited to the wedding even though half the city was. Lena's sandwich fell from nerveless fingers, hitting the table with a soft thud. How? I make it my business to know things, especially when something interests me. I'm not something. Her voice shook with anger, with fear, with something else she couldn't name. I'm a person, and you don't get to investigate me like I'm an acquisition. You're right. No defensiveness, just acknowledgement. I apologize. That was invasive. The immediate concession surprised her more than the revelation of how much he knew. Men like him, powerful men, wealthy men, didn't apologize. They justified, they deflected, they blamed. They didn't simply say you're right and mean it. Why me? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. There were dozens of women at that gala. Beautiful, successful, available women. Why notice the ones serving drinks? Because you're the only one who was real. Lena laughed, but it came out bitter. I'm a divorced woman working 3 jobs to keep a studio apartment I can barely afford. Real isn't glamorous. No, Marco agreed. But it's interesting. Glamour is performance. You stopped performing a long time ago. That's rare. That's... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. That's worth knowing. One dinner. The words left her mouth before her brain could catch up. One dinner, in a public place, and then you leave me alone. One dinner, he confirmed. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. I'll send a car. I'll meet you there. Where? He named a restaurant she'd been to exactly once, for her 10th wedding anniversary. Before everything fell apart. Before she learned that the man she'd trusted with her life had been sharing someone else's bed for 3 years. That's... She swallowed hard. That's too expensive. It's dinner, Lena, not a transaction. Everything is a transaction. I've learned that much. Then let me prove you wrong. His voice softened just slightly. 7 p.m. tomorrow. If you don't show, I'll know my answer. He hung up before she could respond. Lena sat in the break room, staring at her phone, her sandwich forgotten and her mind racing. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was exactly the kind of thing she'd sworn never to do again, trust a man who looked at her like she was something worth having. But the thought of returning to invisibility, of spending the rest of her life moving through spaces without ever being in them, she closed her eyes and made a decision she'd probably regret. The dress was wrong. Lena stood in front of her closet, if the narrow alcove with a tension rod could be called a closet, staring at the handful of garments hanging there. Nothing appropriate for a restaurant like Meridian, nothing that wouldn't immediately broadcast exactly how far she'd fallen since her divorce. She'd sold most of her nice clothes 2 months after Jonathan remarried. Needed the money more than the memories. Now she had exactly 3 dresses. The black uniform from the catering company, a floral sundress with a broken zipper she kept meaning to fix, and a navy wrap dress she'd bought at a thrift store for job interviews. The navy dress would have to work. She showered in the tiny bathroom where the water pressure was more suggestion than force, dried her hair until it fell in dark waves around her shoulders instead of the severe bun she wore for work, and applied makeup with a hand that trembled just slightly. Not much. She didn't own much anymore, but enough to feel like herself instead of a ghost. The face that looked back from the mirror startled her. When had she last actually looked at herself instead of just checking that she was presentable enough not to be noticed? There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago, a tightness to her mouth that spoke of too many words swallowed. But there was also something else, a flicker of something that might have been anticipation or might have been terror. Maybe both. At 6:55 p.m., Lena stepped out of the bus 2 blocks from Meridian and walked the rest of the way in heels that weren't quite as awful as her work shoes, but still pinched. The restaurant glowed against the evening sky, all glass and warm light, beautiful people visible through the windows like actors on a stage. She almost turned around 3 times. But then she saw him. Marco stood near the entrance, hands in his pockets, wearing dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. Casual. Almost approachable. Except for the way every person who passed him gave a wide berth, that instinctive recognition of predator, even when the predator was still. He saw her the moment she rounded the corner. His posture shifted, not obviously, just a subtle straightening, a focus that felt like being caught in a spotlight. Lena forced herself to keep walking, to not run, to meet this moment with whatever dignity she had left. "You came." He said it quietly, like he'd genuinely been uncertain. "I said I would." People say a lot of things. I'm not people. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. "No, you're not." He offered his arm. After a moment's hesitation, Lena took it, and they walked into Meridian together. The maitre d' greeted Marco by name, led them to a corner table with a view of the city lights sprawling below, and vanished with a discretion that suggested he'd done this many times before. Lena settled into her chair, hyper-aware of the other diners, of the weight of silverware she hadn't held in months, of the wine list presented to Marco like it was the Dead Sea Scrolls. "You choose," he said, sliding the leather-bound book toward her. "I'm curious what you like." A test. Everything was always a test with men like this. Lena scanned the list, her eyes catching on a burgundy she'd loved once, before she'd learned to drink boxed wine, because it was cheaper and lasted longer. The Chambol Moussigny, she said quietly, if that's acceptable. Marco relayed the choice to the sommelier without looking at the price. Lena tried not to calculate how many hours she'd have to work at the dry cleaner to afford a single glass. Tell me something true, Marco said once they were alone again. What? Something true. About you. Not what you think I want to hear, not what's polite or safe. Something true. Lena studied him, this man who'd upended her careful invisibility with a single glance. Why does it matter? Because lies are easy. I want to know who you actually are. You already investigated me. You know who I am. I know facts. I don't know you. The wine arrived. Marco let her taste it first, another small gesture that shouldn't have mattered, but did. The burgundy was exactly as she remembered, complex, layered, perfect. It tasted like a life she used to have. I hate champagne, Lena said suddenly. I always have. It's too sweet, too bubbly, too celebratory. And I spent years drinking it at galas and fundraisers because that's what women like me were supposed to drink. Elegant, sophisticated, empty. Marco's eyes never left her face. What do you actually like? This. She lifted her glass. Red wine. Bourbon sometimes. Drinks that have weight to them. Substance. Noted. He took a sip of his own wine. What else? What do you mean? What else do you hate that you pretended to love? The question cracked something open inside her. Lena looked down at the table, at the pristine white cloth and the gleaming silverware, and found herself speaking truths she'd never said aloud. I hated the fundraisers, hated the luncheons where women competed over whose charity was more important, hated the country club, the tennis lessons, the book club that never actually read books. The words spilled out faster now, a dam breaking. I hated that my opinions didn't matter as long as I looked good on my husband's arm. Hated that I gave up my graduate program because he said his career needed my support. Hated that I became exactly what everyone expected and lost myself in the process. She stopped abruptly, her cheeks flushing. I'm sorry. That was true, Marco finished. That was true. Don't apologize for it. Their food arrived, scallops for her, steak for him, and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Lena couldn't remember the last time food had tasted this good, or maybe it was just that she was actually tasting it instead of eating mechanically while her mind raced through tomorrow's problems. Your turn, she said finally. Something true. Marco set down his fork, considering. I don't remember the last time I had dinner with someone who wasn't trying to get something from me. Everyone wants something. Yes, but most people pretend they don't. You're honest about it. You told me on the phone exactly what you thought I was. No performance. And what am I trying to get from you? Nothing. He said it with certainty. You didn't want this dinner. You came anyway, but not because you want my money or my connections or whatever reputation you think I have. You came because some part of you is tired of being invisible. Lena's breath caught. You don't know that. Don't I? He leaned forward slightly. You work 3 jobs to survive, but you could call your ex-husband, ask for help. You were married 18 years. There's alimony, assets, legal recourse, but you haven't. Why? Because I don't want anything from him. Exactly. You'd rather break yourself into pieces than ask for help from someone who hurt you. That's pride. That's strength. That's also incredibly lonely. Tears prickled behind Lena's eyes. She blinked them back furiously, reaching for her wine glass to hide the reaction. You think you have me figured out? No. I think you're more complicated than you let anyone see. I think you've spent so long being invisible that you've forgotten how to be anything else. And I think... He paused, his gaze intense. I think you're terrified that if someone actually sees you, they'll confirm what your ex-husband made you believe, that you're not worth keeping. Stop. The word came out sharp, raw. You don't get to psychoanalyze me like I'm some kind of project. You're right. No defensiveness, just acknowledgement. Again. I'm sorry. Lena set down her wine glass, her hands shaking. This was a mistake. She should never have come here. Should never have let herself believe that dinner with a stranger could be anything other than painful. But before she could make an excuse to leave, Marco said quietly, "I was married once." She looked up, startled. 12 years, he continued. She was perfect. Beautiful, intelligent, connected to the right families. Everyone said we were an ideal match. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She died 4 years ago, cancer. And for 2 years after, I didn't let myself feel anything. Built walls, stayed busy, convinced myself that was enough. What changed? Lena heard herself ask. I realized the walls weren't protecting me. They were ensuring I'd never have to risk being hurt again, which meant I'd never have to risk being alive again either. He met her eyes. Sound familiar? It did. It sounded exactly like the last 18 months of her life. I'm not looking for a relationship, Lena said carefully. I can't be what you might want. What do you think I want? I don't know, but men like you, powerful, wealthy men, you don't notice women like me unless you want something. Sex, maybe. Or the ego boost of rescuing someone, or what if I just want to know you? The simplicity of the statement stopped her. Why? She whispered. Because when I saw you at that gala, moving through that room like you were trying to disappear, I recognized something. Someone who'd survived by becoming invisible. Someone who'd forgotten they were allowed to take up space. He paused. I spent 2 years like that. I know what it costs, and I know what it takes to come back from it. You think you can fix me? No. I think you can fix yourself if you stop believing you're broken. Lena stared at him, this man who spoke in truths that cut like knives, who saw through every defense she'd built, who looked at her like she was something more than a cautionary tale. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I don't know how to be visible again. You don't have to know. You just have to be willing to try. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of conversation that felt nothing like the stilted small talk Lena had grown used to. Marco asked questions, real questions, about her abandoned graduate work in art history, about the books she actually read instead of the ones she'd pretended to discuss at her old book club, about what she wanted instead of what she thought she should want. And slowly, tentatively, Lena answered. Not performing, not pretending, just talking. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was the first time in 18 months she'd felt like a person instead of a function. When the check came, discreetly presented in a leather folder, Marco handled it without letting her see the total. They walked out into the cool night air, and Lena realized with a start that 3 hours had passed. 3 hours that felt like 30 minutes. I'll take you home, Marco said. I can take the bus. I know you can. I'm offering to drive you. A black car was already waiting at the curb, a driver emerging to open the back door. Lena hesitated, then slid inside. The interior was all soft leather and subtle lighting, more luxury in this single vehicle than in her entire apartment. Marco settled beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. He gave the driver an address, her address, which he shouldn't know but obviously did, and they pulled into traffic. This doesn't change anything, Lena said quietly. One dinner doesn't mean I'm ready for whatever this is. I know. I have a lot of damage, a lot of walls. I know that too. Then why? Because damage doesn't mean disposable. Walls don't mean unworthy. And because I think you've spent long enough believing both of those things. He turned to look at her, his expression serious. I'm not asking you to trust me, Lena. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that you might be worth more than you've been told. The car pulled up outside her building, a tired structure with flickering hallway lights and graffiti on the exterior wall. Lena felt a flush of shame, seeing it through his eyes. Marco walked her to the door anyway. Thank you for dinner, she said, fumbling for her keys. It was true? A small smile touched her lips. Yeah, true. Can I see you again? The question should have been simple. It wasn't. Because saying yes meant choosing to be seen, to be vulnerable, to risk being hurt again. But saying no meant returning to invisibility, to safety that felt more like suffocation every day. I don't know, Lena admitted. I need to think. Take all the time you need. Marco pulled a card from his pocket, the same card she'd left on the bar. When you're ready, call, or don't, but know that the offer stands. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Lena, I think you're incredibly brave. It takes courage to survive what you've survived and still be willing to try again." Then he was gone, disappearing into the car, leaving her standing in the doorway with her heart pounding and her mind racing. Lena climbed the stairs to her apartment, unlocked the door, and stood in the middle of her small space, this room that held everything she owned, everything she'd become. The card sat heavy in her hand. She looked at it for a long time. Then, before she could change her mind, she programmed the number into her phone. She didn't call. Not yet, but she kept it there. A possibility waiting in the dark. Outside her window, the city glittered with lights from lives being lived. And for the first time in 18 months, Lena wondered if maybe, just maybe, she could be part of that world again. If she could find the courage to step out of the shadows. If she could believe that being seen wouldn't destroy her. If she could trust that this man, this dangerous, intense, impossible man, might actually mean what he said. The question was, did she dare find out? Lena looked at her phone, at the number saved under his name, and felt something shift inside her. Not healing, not yet, but the first crack in the walls she'd built, letting in a sliver of light. It was a start. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Lena didn't call the next day, or the day after that. She went to work at the dry cleaner, pressed shirts until her shoulders ached, smiled at customers who didn't look at her face, and took the bus home through streets that felt simultaneously more vivid and more oppressive than before. The dinner with Marco had cracked something open inside her, not healing, but awareness. She noticed things now. The way other people moved through the world with confidence she'd forgotten how to feel. The way invisibility had become not just survival, but identity. On the third night, she lay in bed staring at her phone, Marco's number glowing on the screen. Her thumb hovered over the call button a dozen times before she finally set the phone down and turned off the light. What would she even say? "Thank you for seeing me, now please stop because it terrifies me"? The fourth day brought rain, heavy, relentless sheets that turned the city gray and made her commute miserable. Lena stood under the shelter at the bus stop, water dripping from her cheap umbrella, when a black car pulled up to the curb. The same car from dinner. The window lowered. Marco sat in the back seat, watching her with that same intensity that made her feel transparent. "Get in," he said. It wasn't a command, just a statement of fact like he knew she would and was simply waiting for her to acknowledge it. Lena should have refused, should have stayed at the bus stop and waited for public transportation like she did every other day. Instead, she folded her umbrella and slid into the warmth of his car, water pooling at her feet. "You're following me now?" she asked, not looking at him. "I was in the area." "This is 15 miles from anywhere you'd need to be." "Maybe I needed to be here." His voice held a trace of amusement. "You didn't call." "I said I needed time to think." "I know. I'm not here to pressure you." "Then why are you here?" Marco was quiet for a moment, and when she finally turned to look at him, something in his expression made her breath catch. Vulnerability. Just a flash of it, quickly masked, but real. "Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you," he admitted, "and I wanted to make sure you were all right. I work at a dry cleaner and ride the bus. I'm the definition of all right." "That's not what I meant." The car moved smoothly through traffic, the driver navigating with practiced efficiency. Lena realized they weren't heading toward her apartment. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere dry. Unless you'd prefer I take you home." She should say yes, should insist on going back to her small, safe space where men like Marco DeLuca didn't upend her carefully constructed walls. But the thought of returning to that empty room, of spending another evening alone with only her thoughts for company, felt suddenly unbearable. "Somewhere dry is fine," she heard herself say. They drove in silence through rain-slicked streets until the car pulled up outside a building Lena recognized, one of the new luxury high-rises that had transformed the waterfront, all glass and steel and wealth. Marco's hand was at the small of her back as they entered the lobby, guiding but not controlling, and she found herself in an elevator ascending to the top floor. His penthouse. Of course it was his penthouse. The doors opened directly into a space that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern furniture that managed to be both expensive and comfortable, art on the walls that she recognized from her abandoned graduate studies. A Rothko, an actual Rothko, hanging in his living room like it belonged there. "You collect?" she said, moving toward the painting without thinking. "I appreciate beauty." Marco shrugged off his jacket, draping it over a chair. "Wine? Coffee? Something stronger?" "Wine." Lena couldn't tear her eyes from the Rothko. Do you know what this is worth?" "I know what I paid for it. Whether that's what it's worth is subjective." She turned to find him watching her again, that same piercing focus that made her feel like he could see straight through her defenses. He handed her a glass of red wine. Not the burgundy from dinner, but something equally complex. "Why did you really bring me here?" Lena asked. "And don't say to get out of the rain." Marco moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not touching. "Because I wanted you to see something." "Your expensive art collection?" "No." He gestured to the windows, to the city spread below them. "This, all of it. I wanted you to see what the world looks like from up here instead of from the bus stop in the rain. To show me what I'm missing, what I could have if I just say yes to whatever you're offering. To show you that the invisibility you've wrapped yourself in isn't the only option." His voice was quiet, serious. "You think you have two choices, Lena. Be invisible and safe, or be seen and destroyed. But there's a third choice you haven't considered." "What's that?" "Be seen and survive anyway. Be seen and choose who gets access. Be seen on your own terms instead of someone else's." Lena took a long drink of wine, her hands trembling slightly. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple. It's terrifying. But it's possible." She turned to face him fully, this man who'd appeared in her life like a storm and refused to let her hide. "What do you want from me, Marco?" "Really?" "The truth? Always the truth. I want to know you. Not the woman you were before your divorce, not the invisible ghost you've become. The actual you, underneath all the walls and fear and survival." He set his own glass down, his full attention on her. "I want to see if the person I think you are matches the person you actually are. And I want you to let yourself be seen without punishing yourself for it." "That's a lot to want from someone you barely know." "I know. That's why I'm not demanding it. I'm asking. There's a difference." Lena moved away from him, needing space to think. She walked to the windows, pressing her palm against the cool glass. The city glittered below, millions of lights representing millions of lives. Somewhere down there was her studio apartment, her 3 jobs, her carefully maintained invisibility. "My ex-husband used to bring me to places like this," she said quietly. "Penthouses, galas, restaurants with wine lists longer than novels. He'd introduce me to important people, show me off like I was part of his collection. And I thought that's what love looked like, being displayed, being admired, being owned." Behind her, Marco's voice was carefully neutral. "And then? And then I found out he'd been sleeping with my best friend for 3 years, that every time he brought me to those places, showed me off, acted like I was precious. He was lying. To me. To everyone. I was just a prop in his performance of success. I'm not him." "I know." Lena turned, meeting his eyes. "That's what scares me. Because if you're not him, if you actually mean what you say, then I have to face the possibility that I was wrong, that I gave up everything, my education, my dreams, my sense of self, for a man who never valued any of it. And if I was that wrong about him, how can I trust my judgment about you?" Marco moved toward her slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted. She didn't. He stopped a foot away, close enough that she had to tilt her head to maintain eye contact. "You can't," he said simply. "Trust isn't logical. It's a choice you make despite the risk, despite the fear, despite every reason you have to protect yourself. Then why should I choose it? Because the alternative is spending the rest of your life half alive. And I don't think you want that anymore, or you wouldn't have come to dinner. You wouldn't be here right now." Lena's chest tightened. He was right. She hated that he was right. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to let someone see me without waiting for them to find me lacking." "Then don't wait for it. Assume I already see your flaws, and I'm here anyway." "You don't know my flaws. You're stubborn to the point of self-destruction. You'd rather suffer than ask for help. You've convinced yourself that wanting anything beyond survival is selfish. You hide behind service jobs because if no one sees you, no one can reject you. His voice was gentle but unflinching. Am I close? Lena's breath came shallow. That's not fair. It's also not a deal breaker. We all have damage, Lena. Mine just comes with better real estate. Despite everything, she almost smiled. Almost. What's your damage? She asked. I control things. People, situations, outcomes. I tell myself it's about efficiency, about power, about maintaining what I've built. But really it's about fear. If I control everything, nothing can surprise me. Nothing can hurt me. He paused. Until you. I can't control you. Can't predict you. And instead of walking away like I should, I keep coming back. Why? Because you're the first real thing I've encountered in 4 years. And I'm tired of living in a world where everything is a transaction and everyone wants something. Lena studied him, this powerful man admitting weakness like it was nothing, like vulnerability wasn't something to be weaponized. I'm not going to be easy, she said finally. I don't want easy. I want real. I have panic attacks sometimes, when spaces get too crowded or too quiet, when I feel trapped. Okay, I have debt I'm drowning in. I'll probably never pay it all off. That's not what I care about. I don't trust easily. I might never trust you completely. Trust is earned, not demanded. I can live with that. Lena felt something crack inside her, wider than before. What if I'm not worth all this effort? Marco's hand came up, fingers gentle against her jaw, tilting her face toward his. What if you are, and you've just forgotten? The kiss happened slowly, so slowly she could have stopped it a dozen times. His mouth brushed hers, questioning rather than claiming, and when she didn't pull away, he deepened it. Not aggressive, not demanding, just present, consuming in its gentleness. Lena's hands came up to his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palms. Steady, real. She kissed him back, pouring 18 months of loneliness and fear and desperate hope into it, and when they finally broke apart, she was shaking. I can't do this casually, she said, her voice unsteady. I can't be something you try on and discard when it gets complicated. I don't do anything casually. Marco's thumb traced her cheekbone. And complicated doesn't scare me. It should. Probably, but I've never been particularly good at self-preservation where you're concerned. Lena laughed, but it came out more like a sob. This is insane. We barely know each other. Then let's fix that. He stepped back, giving her space. Stay. Have dinner with me. Not at a restaurant. Here, let me cook for you. You cook? I'm Italian. Of course I cook. Something about the casual way he said it, the hint of personality beneath the intensity, made her decision easier. Okay, Lena said, but I'm helping. They moved to the kitchen, a chef's dream of marble and steel, and Marco pulled ingredients from a refrigerator that actually had food in it. Fresh pasta, San Marzano tomatoes, basil that smelled like summer. He worked with practiced efficiency, and Lena found herself chopping garlic while he prepared the sauce, their movements developing an easy rhythm. My grandmother taught me, Marco said, stirring the tomatoes. Said a man who couldn't feed himself was half a person. Was she right? About that? Yes. About most things, actually. She was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Is she still alive? No, she died when I was 17, but I still hear her voice sometimes, usually when I'm about to make a stupid decision. Lena smiled, slicing basil into thin ribbons. What does she say? Marco Antonio De Luca, you're being an idiot. Stop it. He said it with such perfect Italian inflection that Lena actually laughed. A real laugh. Not the polite sound she'd perfected over years of performing. And do you? Stop it? Not usually, but at least I know I'm being an idiot going in. They cooked together and Lena realized she was relaxed in a way she hadn't been since before her marriage imploded. Marco told stories about his grandmother, about growing up in a neighborhood that didn't exist anymore, about learning business from uncles who taught him that power was about respect, not fear. Though they also taught me that fear has its uses, he added, tasting the sauce and adding salt. But that's a different conversation. Is it true? Lena asked. What the bartender said? That you own half the city? I own significant real estate holdings. Whether that constitutes half the city is debatable. And the other things? The things people don't talk about? Marco's hand stilled. He set down the wooden spoon and turned to face her fully. Yes. Just that. Yes. No justification, no deflection. Should I be afraid? Lena asked. Of me? No. Of what association with me might mean? Possibly. He held her gaze. I'm not going to lie to you, Lena. My business interests exist in gray areas. I've made decisions that would horrify you if you knew the details. I've hurt people who threatened what's mine, and I won't apologize for any of it because that's the world I operate in. But I would never hurt you, and I would end anyone who tried. It should have sounded threatening. Instead, it sounded like a promise. I don't need protection, Lena said quietly. Everyone needs protection sometimes. The question is whether you can accept it without seeing it as a loss of agency. I don't know if I can. Then we'll figure it out together. The pasta was perfect, simple, elegant, exactly right. They ate at his dining table with the city spread below them, and Lena found herself talking about things she hadn't discussed in years. Her abandoned dissertation on Renaissance art, her love of jazz that her ex-husband had mocked as pretentious, her dream of traveling to Venice someday, not for the tourist sites, but to see the art in context. So go, Marco said, refilling her wine. I can't afford... Not about money, about priority. If you wanted to go badly enough, you'd find a way. You're resourceful enough. I have responsibilities. You have fear disguised as responsibilities. There's a difference. Lena bristled. You don't know my life. You're right. I don't. But I know the look of someone who's stopped dreaming because dreaming hurts too much. His voice softened. I wore that look for 2 years after my wife died, convinced myself that wanting anything was betraying her memory. It wasn't. It was just fear. What changed? I woke up one day and realized she'd hate what I'd become. She loved life, loved beauty and art and spontaneity, and I'd turned into this hollow thing going through motions. He paused. She would have liked you, I think, would have appreciated your refusal to perform. Would she have been okay with this? With you pursuing someone new? She made me promise not to spend my life alone. Said love wasn't finite, that caring for someone new didn't diminish what we had. Marco's expression turned distant, remembering. I didn't believe her then, but I think I'm starting to understand what she meant. Lena reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. The gesture felt natural, instinctive. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for asking. He turned his hand over, lacing their fingers together. Most people don't. They see the power, the money, the reputation, and they assume there's nothing real underneath. Is there? You tell me. You're looking at it. They finished dinner talking about everything and nothing. Books, music, the way the city changed after dark. Marco told her about properties he was developing, his vision for preserving neighborhoods while improving them, the constant balance between profit and principle. Lena found herself fascinated by the way his mind worked, the careful consideration beneath the decisive exterior. You should see them, Marco said suddenly. The properties, the neighborhoods. See what I'm actually building instead of what people assume. Why does it matter what I think? Because you see things others don't. You notice details, and because... He hesitated, something vulnerable crossing his face again. Because your opinion matters to me. Lena's heart did something complicated in her chest. I work tomorrow. When are you off? Thursday. I have Thursday afternoons free. Then Thursday. I'll pick you up at noon. Marco, just a tour. No pressure, no expectations. Just let me show you what I do when I'm not being whoever people think I am. She should say no, should maintain distance, protect herself, remember that men like him were dangerous in ways that went beyond the obvious. But when she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw someone as cautious as she was, as damaged, as desperate for connection they'd both convinced themselves they didn't need. Thursday, she agreed. Noon. The smile that crossed his face transformed him, softening the sharp edges into something almost boyish. Thursday. Later, when his driver took her home through streets that had stopped raining, Lena leaned her head against the window and tried to process everything that had happened. One dinner had turned into an afternoon in his car. An afternoon had turned into evening at his penthouse. Evening had turned into promises of Thursday, into possibilities she'd thought were dead. It terrified her. It exhilarated her. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall would either destroy her or teach her to fly. When she climbed the stairs to her apartment, she found a package waiting at her door. Inside was a book, a comprehensive study of Venetian Renaissance art, first edition, probably worth more than 3 months of her rent. The note was simple: "For when you're ready to dream again." Lena sat on her bed holding the book, tears streaming down her face for reasons she couldn't entirely name. No one had given her anything in so long. No one had listened when she talked about art, about dreams, about anything that mattered to her actual self rather than the person she'd been expected to be. She opened the book carefully, running her fingers over the pages, and saw her future self standing in Venice with this knowledge, this beauty, this possibility. And for the first time since her divorce, that future self didn't look like a fantasy. She looked like a choice. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marco. "Thank you for tonight. Sleep well." Lena typed back before she could overthink it. "Thank you for seeing me." His response came immediately. "Always." She set the phone down, curled up with the book, and let herself imagine. Not the careful, controlled imaginings of someone afraid to want too much, but real dreams, vivid and terrifying and so beautiful they hurt. Outside her window, the city had stopped raining, and inside, something that had been frozen for 18 months began, finally, to thaw. Thursday came faster than Lena expected. She almost called it off a dozen times, her finger hovering over Marco's number with excuses already formed. But each time, she thought about the book on her nightstand, about the way he'd looked at her like she was worth knowing, and she set the phone down instead. At noon exactly, the black car pulled up outside her building. Marco stood beside it, wearing dark jeans and a gray sweater that made him look less like a dangerous power broker and more like someone she might have met in a completely different life. The thought unsettled her. "Ready?" he asked as she approached. "To see your empire?" "Not particularly." His mouth quirked. "It's not an empire, it's just work. Work that makes bartenders nervous and buys first edition art books like they're paperbacks." "Fair point." He opened the car door for her. "But I promise, it's less intimidating than you think." They drove through the city, Marco pointing out buildings and blocks with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely invested in their transformation. He showed her a neighborhood that had been abandoned 5 years ago, now transformed into mixed-income housing with ground-floor spaces for local businesses. "The key is not displacing people," Marco explained as they walked through a community garden that hadn't existed 6 months ago. "Anyone who lived here before gets first option on the new units at their old rent. Local businesses get below-market rates for 5 years. It's not charity, it's investment in the community." "Most developers don't think that way," Lena observed. "Most developers only see profit. I see people." He paused. "That probably sounds hypocritical coming from me." "Why?" "Because profit matters. I'm not pretending to be altruistic, but profit at the expense of destroying communities is short-sighted. You want real wealth? Build something that lasts. Build something people are invested in protecting." They spent the afternoon touring properties in various stages of development. Marco introduced her to project managers, architects, even some of the residents. And Lena watched as people's demeanor shifted when they saw him. Not fear, exactly, but respect mixed with something else. Trust, maybe. Or the expectation of fairness. "You're different here," she said as they walked through a building being converted from an old warehouse into artist lofts. "How so?" "Less controlled, more human." Marco laughed. "Should I be offended?" "No, it's just, at the gala, in your penthouse, even at dinner, there's this intensity. Like you're always assessing, always calculating. But here with these projects, you actually relax. Because this matters. This is real." He gestured to the space around them. "Everything else is performance. Necessary performance, but still. This is what I actually care about. They climbed to the top floor where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the river. The space was raw, exposed brick, concrete floors, industrial fixtures. But Lena could see the potential. Could imagine artists filling it with color and light and life. I saved this unit, Marco said quietly. Took it off the rental list. Why? He turned to look at her, that intensity back but softer now. Because I thought maybe someday you'd want it. A studio, a space to work, to dream in. Lena's breath caught. Marco, I'm not asking you to take it. I'm not asking you for anything. I just wanted you to know it exists, that the possibility exists. He moved closer. You talked about your abandoned dissertation, about art history, about dreams you gave up. This space could be yours if you ever want to reclaim them. I can't afford. It's already paid for. Has been for a week. She stared at him, emotions warring inside her. Gratitude, anger, fear, hope. You can't just buy me a studio. I can do whatever I want with my property. If I choose to keep one unit empty on the chance that someday you might need it, that's my decision. It's too much. It's an empty room, Lena. It only becomes too much if you let it mean too much. Everything with you means too much. The words came out more vulnerable than she'd intended. You show up in my life and suddenly there are possibilities I thought were dead. Art books and studios and futures I can't afford to imagine. And what happens when you disappear? When you realize I'm not worth the effort? I'm left with all these dreams and no way to survive them. Marco's hands framed her face, gentle but firm. I'm not going to disappear. I'm not your ex-husband. I don't make promises I can't keep. Everyone says that. I know. His thumb traced her cheekbone. And I know trust is earned, not declared. So I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to let me prove it, week by week, day by day, until you believe it. And if I can't, if I'm too damaged to ever fully trust anyone again, then we work with what you can give. Partial trust is better than none. Guarded hope is better than despair. Whatever you're capable of, Lena, I'll take it. Because even your fragments are more real than most people's wholeness. She kissed him then, pulling him down to her, desperate and afraid and so tired of fighting herself. Marco responded immediately, his arms wrapping around her like he could shield her from every fear, every doubt, every memory that told her this couldn't be real. When they finally broke apart, Lena pressed her forehead to his chest, listening to his heartbeat. I don't know how to do this, how to want something without waiting for it to be taken away. One day at a time, one choice at a time. His hand stroked her hair. And I'll be here, for all of it. They stood in that empty studio as afternoon light turned golden, holding each other while the city moved below. And Lena let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might feel like to claim this space, to fill it with books and art and dreams she'd thought were buried with her marriage. It felt like possibility, like risk, like the first real breath she'd taken in 18 months. And as Marco's arms tightened around her, she thought maybe, just maybe, she could learn to believe in it. Learning to believe turned out to be harder than Lena had anticipated. Over the next 3 weeks, Marco became a constant presence in her life. Not overwhelming, but steady. He'd text her good morning before she left for the dry cleaner. He'd send a car on rainy evenings when the bus would have left her soaked. He'd show up at her building on her days off with coffee and pastries from a bakery she'd mentioned loving once, years ago, before her budget had shrunk to necessities only. And slowly, cautiously, Lena let him in. They fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Dinners at his penthouse where she'd help him cook, and they'd argue about whether Caravaggio was a genius or just dramatic. Walks through the neighborhoods he was developing, where she'd offer observations about community spaces, and he'd actually listen, actually implement her suggestions. Quiet evenings where they'd sit on his couch and she'd read while he worked, the silence comfortable rather than oppressive. It was the kind of relationship she'd thought only existed in movies, easy and complicated in equal measure, built on conversation and genuine interest rather than performance and expectation. But Lena kept waiting for the trap to spring, for the moment when Marco would reveal what he actually wanted, what she'd have to give up to keep him. Because men like him didn't invest this much time in women like her without expecting something in return. She just hadn't figured out what yet. The explosion came on a Tuesday. Lena was at the dry cleaner, pressing a businessman's shirts while half listening to the small television in the back room, when her phone erupted with notifications. Text after text, call after call, all from numbers she didn't recognize. She ignored them at first, focused on getting the caller crease exactly right, but when her manager appeared in the doorway looking uncomfortable, her stomach dropped. "Lena, there are reporters outside. They're asking for you." The shirt slipped from her hands. "What?" "I don't know what's going on, but they've got cameras. They're blocking the entrance. I need you to—" Her manager shifted awkwardly. "I need you to handle this. Away from the store." Lena's hands trembled as she untied her apron. "I don't understand. Why would reporters want to talk to me?" But even as she said it, dread coiled in her stomach. There was only one reason reporters would care about a divorced woman working at a dry cleaner. Only one connection that would make her newsworthy. Marco. She walked to the front of the store on legs that felt disconnected from her body. Through the window she could see them, 3 people with cameras and microphones, and behind them, a face that made her blood turn to ice. Jonathan, her ex-husband. Standing with his arm around Melissa, Lena's former best friend, now his wife, looking directly at the dry cleaner with an expression of calculated concern. "I can't," Lena whispered. "I can't go out there." "You have to. They're disrupting business." Her manager's voice was sympathetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Lena, but you need to deal with this." Lena pushed through the door into chaos. Ms. Hart, is it true you're involved with Marco DeLuca? How long have you been seeing him? Does he know about your financial situation? Jonathan Hart, can you comment on your ex-wife's new relationship?" The questions came like bullets, disorienting and relentless. Lena froze on the sidewalk, her mind blank with panic. This was her nightmare: exposure, scrutiny, being visible in the worst possible way. Jonathan stepped forward, his expression perfectly calibrated to look worried rather than vindictive. She knew that look, had fallen for it 1,000 times during their marriage. "Lena, I'm concerned about you," he said, loud enough for the cameras to catch. "Getting involved with a man like DeLuca, you have to understand the kind of danger that puts you in." "I'm not—" Lena's voice came out weak. "I'm not discussing my private life." "Private?" Melissa spoke up, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Honey, it stopped being private when you started dating a known criminal. We're just worried about you." "Marco's not a criminal." The words came out stronger than Lena felt. "Really?" Jonathan pulled out his phone, showing her a screen she couldn't quite see. "Because there are some very interesting connections between his businesses and some very questionable people. Did you know that? Or were you too busy enjoying his money to ask questions?" The reporters ate it up, cameras swiveling between them like spectators at a tennis match. "I need you to leave," Lena said, hating how her voice shook. "Both of you. This is harassment." "Harassment?" Jonathan's expression turned cold, the mask slipping just enough for her to see the cruelty underneath. "I'm trying to help you. Again. Just like I tried to help you during the divorce, but you were too proud to accept a reasonable settlement. You offered me nothing. I offered you what you deserved after you refused to be the wife I needed. But now, seeing you like this..." He gestured at her work uniform, her secondhand clothes, the dry cleaner behind her. "Maybe I was too generous. Maybe this is exactly where you belong." The words hit like physical blows. Lena felt herself shrinking, becoming invisible again, all the progress she'd made with Marco evaporating under the weight of Jonathan's contempt and the camera's glare. "That's enough!" The voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Lena turned to see Marco emerging from a car she hadn't noticed, his expression carved from ice. The reporters immediately redirected, shouting questions, but he ignored them completely. His focus was entirely on Jonathan. "You're going to leave," Marco said quietly. "Dangerously. Right now." Jonathan actually stepped back, an involuntary response to whatever he saw in Marco's eyes. But he recovered quickly, that false concern back in place. "I'm just looking out for Lena. Someone has to, since she clearly can't make good decisions on her own. Her decisions are none of your concern. You lost that right when you divorced her." "I'm still her." "You're nothing to her." Marco's voice dropped even lower, and several reporters leaned in to catch it. You're a man who cheated on his wife, humiliated her publicly, and then tried to destroy her financially out of spite. So whatever concern you're performing right now, save it. No one believes you." Melissa clutched Jonathan's arm, whispering something urgent. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he was smart enough to recognize when he was outmatched. "Fine. We're leaving. But Lena," he turned to her one last time, "when this falls apart, when he's done with you and you have nothing left, don't come crying to me." "She won't need to," Marco said, "because I'm not you." Jonathan and Melissa left, climbing into their Mercedes with as much dignity as they could salvage. But the reporters remained, cameras still rolling, questions still flying. Marco turned to them with an expression that made several people actually retreat. "This is what's going to happen," he said, his voice carrying without being raised. "You're going to delete any footage of Ms. Hart. You're going to leave this location immediately, and you're going to forget you were ever here. Mr. DeLuca, the public has a right to nothing concerning Miss Hart's private life. She's not a public figure. She's not seeking attention. And anyone who publishes anything about her will find themselves dealing with legal consequences they're not prepared for." He paused, letting that sink in. "Are we clear?" The reporters exchanged glances. One started to argue, but an older man with a camera shook his head sharply. They knew who Marco was, knew what fighting him would cost. Within 2 minutes, the sidewalk was clear. Marco turned to Lena, his expression softening immediately. "Are you okay?" She wanted to say yes, wanted to be strong and unaffected. Instead, she felt tears burning behind her eyes and a scream building in her chest. "I need to get out of here," she whispered. He had her in the car before she could process moving, before her manager could emerge from the dry cleaner, before the panic fully hit. The driver pulled away smoothly, and Marco's arm came around her shoulders, solid and warm, and the only thing keeping her from shattering. "I'm sorry," Marco said quietly. "This is my fault. I should have anticipated—" "How?" Lena's voice broke. "How could you anticipate my ex-husband weaponizing our relationship for what? Revenge? Attention? I don't even know what he gets out of humiliating me. Control. He gets to feel powerful by making you feel small. Well, it worked." She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold back the tears. "I just want to be invisible again. I want to go back to before, when no one cared who I was or what I did." "No, you don't." The certainty in his voice made her look up. "You don't get to tell me what I want." "You're right. I don't." Marco's hand cupped her face, gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. "But I know what you needed when I met you, invisibility, safety, protection from being hurt again. And I know what you've discovered over the past few weeks, that being seen isn't the same as being destroyed, that wanting things doesn't make you weak, that you're stronger than you thought you were." "I don't feel strong right now, because someone you trusted tried to tear you down in public. That's not weakness, Lena. That's trauma. There's a difference." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "What happens now? Those reporters might not publish, but people saw. People know. My manager knows. What if I lose my job? What if this follows me everywhere? Then I make it go away. You can't just make reality disappear." "No, but I can make consequences for anyone who tries to hurt you with it." His voice hardened. "And I can ensure your ex-husband understands that coming after you again would be a very bad decision." Something in his tone made Lena's eyes snap open. "Marco, what does that mean?" "It means I protect what's mine. I'm not yours to protect. Aren't you?" He held her gaze. "We've spent 3 weeks building something. I've been careful, patient, letting you set the pace. But if you think I'm going to stand by while someone terrorizes you, while your ex-husband tries to drag you back into shame and invisibility, you don't know me as well as I thought. I don't want you fighting my battles. Too bad. Because this stopped being just your battle the moment he brought cameras and tried to destroy you publicly." Marco's jaw was set in a way that suggested arguing would be pointless. "I'm not asking your permission, Lena. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Your ex-husband is going to realize that targeting you means targeting me, and that's a fight he can't win." Part of her wanted to argue, to insist on handling her own problems, on maintaining independence. But another part, The part that was exhausted from 18 months of fighting alone wanted to let him, wanted to believe someone would actually stand between her and the cruelty. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. "Nothing illegal, nothing violent, just make some things clear." He stroked her hair, his touch gentle, despite the steel in his voice. "Trust me. That's asking a lot." "I know, but I'm asking anyway." The car pulled up to Marco's building. Lena didn't question it, didn't suggest going to her own apartment. She let him guide her upstairs, let him settle her on his couch with a blanket and wine, let him simply be there while she processed everything that had happened. "I hate him," she said finally, staring at the city through the windows. "I hate that he still has this power over me, that after everything he can still make me feel worthless." "He doesn't make you feel anything. He triggers feelings that were already there, fears your marriage taught you to have. But those feelings aren't truth, they're echoes of trauma." "You sound like a therapist." "I've had enough therapy to sound like one." Marco sat beside her, not touching but close. "After my wife died, I spent 2 years convinced I'd never feel anything again, convinced that loving someone meant giving them the power to destroy you. And I wasn't wrong. Love is vulnerability. But vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage." Lena turned to look at him. "Is that what this is? Love?" "I don't know." His honesty was stark, undefended. "I know I think about you constantly. I know your happiness matters to me in ways nothing else has in years. I know I'd burn down anyone who tries to hurt you, whether that's love or obsession or just desperate need for connection. I can't say, but it's real, and it's not going anywhere. What if I can't give you what you need? What do you think I need? I don't know. Trust, certainty, someone who isn't constantly fighting themselves just to let you close. I need you exactly as you are, fighting, uncertain, guarded. Because that means when you do let me close, I know it's real. I know you're not performing." His hand found hers. "I don't need perfect, Lena. I need real, and you're the realest thing in my life." She wanted to believe him, wanted it with an intensity that scared her. But Jonathan's words kept echoing. When this falls apart, when he's done with you and you have nothing left. What if he's right? The question came out small. What if this is just temporary and I'm setting myself up to be destroyed again? Then I guess we both are. Marco's smile was slight, sad. Because if you think you're the only one risking something here, you're wrong. I'm 43 years old, Lena. I built an empire, survived grief, insulated myself against every possible threat. And then you walked into my life and made all of that meaningless. You make me want things I thought were dead. You make me feel things I thought I'd buried with my wife. And if that's not risk, I don't know what is. Lena squeezed his hand, fighting tears. I'm so tired of being afraid. Then stop, just for tonight. Just here. Let yourself feel safe. She curled into him, letting his arms wrap around her, and for the first time since the reporters had appeared, she felt her breathing slow. Her heartbeat steady. The panic receded into something manageable. They stayed like that as the sun set, as the city lights came on one by one, as the world kept spinning outside while inside. In this moment, everything was still. Marco's phone buzzed repeatedly, but he ignored it. Whatever crisis needed handling, whatever fires needed putting out, they could wait. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the woman in his arms and the fragile trust she was offering. Lena dozed eventually, exhausted from the adrenaline crash. When she woke, night had fully fallen and Marco was on his phone, speaking in low, rapid Italian. She caught words like permanently and consequences and understood before he noticed she was awake and ended the call. Sorry, didn't mean to wake you. Who was that? Someone who's going to have a conversation with your ex-husband about appropriate boundaries. Marco, it's done, Lena. By morning, he'll understand that you're off limits, permanently. She should feel concerned, should question what conversation meant in Marco's world. Instead, she felt relief so profound it made her dizzy. Thank you, she whispered. You don't thank someone for protecting you. It's not a favor. It's necessity. They ordered food, Thai from a place that delivered to his building at midnight. and ate on the floor in front of the windows like teenagers instead of adults navigating complicated feelings. Marco told her stories about the ridiculous requests he got from potential tenants, and Lena found herself laughing, actually laughing, just hours after everything had fallen apart. "Stay tonight," Marco said as they were cleaning up. I'm not asking for anything except your presence. But I don't want you going back to your apartment alone. Not tonight." Lena knew she should refuse, should maintain boundaries, keep some distance, protect herself from falling too far. But the thought of her empty studio, of lying awake all night replaying Jonathan's cruelty and the reporter's invasive questions, was unbearable. "Okay," she said, "but I need to borrow clothes." He gave her one of his shirts and soft pants that she had to roll at the waist. She looked ridiculous, drowning in fabric, but Marco's expression when she emerged from his bathroom made her feel beautiful anyway. "Come here," he said, pulling her toward the bedroom. Lena's heart rate spiked, but he just led her to the bed and pulled back the covers. They lay down facing each other, close but not quite touching, and the intimacy of it, of being this near without expectation, without performance, felt more vulnerable than anything physical. "Tell me something," Marco said quietly. "Something you've never told anyone." Lena thought for a long moment. "I used to write poetry. Before my marriage, before everything. I had a notebook full of terrible, melodramatic poems about art and beauty and meaning. And when Jonathan and I got engaged, I threw it away. I convinced myself it was childish, that I needed to be an adult now. But really, I was erasing the parts of myself he didn't value." "Do you still write?" "No, I don't remember how." "That's a lie, you remember. You're just afraid it won't be good enough." She smiled despite the ache in her chest. "Your turn. Something you've never told anyone." Marco was quiet long enough that she thought he might refuse. Then, "I'm terrified of losing control. It's why I micromanage everything, why I need to know every detail, why I struggle to delegate. Because the one time I let my guard down, the one time I wasn't vigilant, my wife got sick, and I couldn't control it, couldn't fix it, couldn't do anything but watch her slip away. So I promised myself I'd never be that powerless again." "But you can't control everything." "I know. It doesn't stop me from trying." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "And then you came along and made control irrelevant. I can't predict you, can't manage you, can't ensure you won't hurt me. And instead of running, I keep choosing to stay." "That's terrifying." "Yes, but it's also the most alive I've felt in 4 years." They talked until exhaustion pulled them under, Marco's hand eventually finding hers beneath the covers, their breathing synchronizing in the dark. And Lena let herself imagine what it might be like to wake up like this every morning, safe, seen, chosen not despite her damage, but including it. When she woke just before dawn, Marco was already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest tight. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi." He smiled. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I have in months, maybe years." "Good." They lay there in the growing light, not speaking, just being. And Lena realized this was what she'd been missing. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but presence. Someone who chose to be there in the quiet moments, who didn't need her to be anything other than exactly who she was. Marco's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He glanced at it and something in his expression sharpened. "What?" Lena asked. "Jonathan tried to call a press conference this morning, tried to make a statement about our relationship, about my business dealings, about his concerns for your safety." Lena's stomach dropped. "Tried?" "It was canceled, along with several of his business permits, and a few of his social club memberships." Marco's voice was casual, but his eyes were steel. "He's currently dealing with some very interesting questions from the IRS about discrepancies in his tax filings." "You did that?" "I made some calls. People owed me favors. Those favors are now collected." "Marco, that's justice. That's justice." He sat up, his focus entirely on her. "He tried to destroy you publicly. He tried to use his power and connections to make you small. So I reminded him that his power is nothing compared to mine, and that targeting you means consequences he's not prepared for." Lena should feel conflicted, should worry about the implications, about what it meant to be with someone who could dismantle a person's life with a few phone calls. Instead, she felt protected in a way she'd never experienced. Not controlled, not owned, protected. "What if it escalates?" she asked. "It won't. Jonathan's not stupid. He knows when he's outmatched. And if he tells people about what you did, who would believe him? A bitter ex-husband making accusations against a respected developer?" Marco's smile was cold. "Besides, I didn't do anything illegal. I just ensured that certain people looked closely at things they should have been watching all along." Lena processed this, the reality of who Marco was settling more firmly. He wasn't just a successful businessman. He was someone with reach, with influence, with the ability to reshape reality when necessary, and he'd used that ability for her. "Thank you," she said finally. "You keep thanking me for things that aren't favors. This is what you do for people you care about. You protect them. Even if they don't ask for it, especially then, because the people who need protection most are usually too proud to ask." He was right. She would never have asked him to intervene, would have tried to handle Jonathan on her own, would have suffered rather than admit she needed help. And Marco had known that, had acted anyway. "I'm falling for you," Lena said quietly, "and it terrifies me." "Good. Be terrified. Be uncertain. Be guarded." Marco pulled her close, his lips brushing her forehead. "But be here anyway. That's all I'm asking." They spent the morning in his penthouse, cooking breakfast together, reading the news to confirm that Jonathan's press conference had indeed been canceled with no explanation. Marco made calls while Lena explored his bookshelves, finding first editions and signed copies mixed with well-worn paperbacks. The combination, expensive and sentimental, felt like him. Controlled exterior with carefully hidden softness underneath. Around noon, her phone rang, her manager at the dry cleaner. Lena answered with dread. "Hello? Lena, I'm so sorry, but I have to let you go. After yesterday, with the reporters and everything, corporate says it's too much liability." The words should have devastated her. Instead, Lena felt strangely calm. "I understand. I really am sorry. You're a good worker, but it's fine. Thank you for calling." She hung up and turned to find Marco watching her. "They fired me," she said. "I know. I heard." He moved toward her. "How do you feel?" "I should be panicking. That was one of my 3 jobs. I need that income. But all I feel is relief?" She laughed, but it came out shaky. "Is that insane?" "No, it's honest. You hated that job." "I hate all my jobs. They're survival, not passion." "Then stop surviving and start living." Marco's hands framed her face. "The studio is yours. Take it. Use it. Figure out what you actually want instead of what you think you can afford to want." "I can't just quit my other jobs. I have rent, bills. I'll cover it." "No." The word came out sharp. "I'm not going to be kept. I'm not going to be dependent on you. It's not about being kept. It's about having space to breathe, to figure out what comes next without drowning in immediate survival." His voice was patient but firm. "Let me do this. Not as charity, as investment in your future." "What future? I don't even know what I want." "Then take time to figure it out. You've spent 2 years in survival mode. Give yourself permission to want something more." Lena wanted to argue, wanted to insist on independence, on handling everything herself. But the exhaustion of maintaining 3 jobs, of constant financial panic, of never having energy for anything beyond basic existence, it was crushing her, had been crushing her since the divorce. 3 months, she heard herself say. "You cover my expenses for 3 months while I figure out what's next. But we draw up a contract. This is a loan, not a gift. I pay you back when I'm stable." Marco's expression softened. "If that's what you need to feel okay about it, fine. We'll draw up whatever makes you comfortable. And I keep my other 2 jobs. I'm not completely dependent on you." "Agreed. Though I reserve the right to send food when I know you're working double shifts." Despite everything, Lena smiled. "You're impossible." "I'm pragmatic. There's a difference." They spent the afternoon drafting an agreement that made Lena feel less like she was being rescued and more like she was accepting strategic support. Marco never argued, never tried to convince her to take more than she was comfortable with. He just listened to her boundaries and respected them. By evening, Lena felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, would probably always be there. But underneath it, a flicker of something else. Hope, maybe, or possibility. The sense that maybe, just maybe, she could build a life that was hers instead of a reaction to everything she'd lost. "Stay again tonight," Marco said as they finished dinner. "And tomorrow. And as many nights as you want. I should go home eventually, get clothes, check my mail. We can go together tomorrow, get whatever you need. But tonight, just stay." Lena looked at him, this man who'd upended her careful invisibility and refused to let her hide, who protected her without controlling her, who saw her damage and called it survival instead of weakness. "Okay," she said. "Tonight." But they both knew she meant more than one night. She meant a future she was finally brave enough to imagine. And as Marco pulled her close, as the city glittered below them, Lena let herself fall. Not into invisibility, not into fear, but into the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of being seen and choosing to stay visible anyway. Whatever came next, whatever challenges or complications or consequences, she would face them differently than before. Not alone, not invisible, but standing beside someone who'd proven that being seen didn't have to mean being destroyed. It could also mean being saved. The photograph appeared on a gossip website at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and by the time Lena saw it 3 hours later, her entire world had already shifted beneath her feet. She was at the dry cleaner, steam rising from the industrial press as she worked through a rack of dress shirts, when her phone began vibrating with a persistence that made her stomach clench. Text after text, notifications pinging so rapidly they blurred together. Her manager shot her a warning look. No phones on the floor, but Lena's hands were already reaching for it, some animal instinct telling her this wasn't normal. The first message was from a number she didn't recognize. "Is this you?" Attached was a link. Lena's fingers trembled as she opened it, and there, splashed across her screen in high definition, was a photograph of her and Marco, leaving his building. His hand at the small of her back, her face tilted up toward his, caught mid-laugh at something he'd said. The image was intimate in a way that made her feel stripped naked. Below it, a headline screamed in bold letters, "Mystery woman captures heart of city's most eligible and dangerous bachelor." The article dissected everything: her name, her divorce, Jonathan's remarriage, the bankruptcy filing she'd thought was sealed, every humiliating detail of her fall from society. Wife to invisible service worker, laid out like evidence in a trial she hadn't known she was facing. And at the center of it all was Marco, described in terms that made her blood run cold. Real estate magnate, political influencer, a man with connections that stretched into shadows the article could only hint at, a man whose previous relationship had ended in tragedy, who'd been alone for 4 years, who'd now apparently chosen Lena Hart, divorced, broke, nobody, as his new companion. The comment section was vicious. Gold digger. She's using him to climb back up. Probably targets rich men. That's how women like her survive. Did you see her ex-husband's new wife? Major upgrade. No wonder he left. Lena's vision blurred. The phone slipped from her hands, clattering against the concrete floor. "You okay?" Her coworker Maria appeared at her elbow, concern creasing her face. "I need..." Lena's voice came out strangled. "I need to go. I'm sorry. She didn't wait for permission, just grabbed her jacket and fled, bursting out into morning sunlight that felt too bright, too exposing. Her phone was ringing again. Marco. She declined the call, then immediately regretted it, then felt panic claw up her throat because what if he'd seen the article? What if he realized this was too much trouble? What if... A black car pulled up to the curb. Not Marco's usual vehicle, but close enough that she recognized the driver, Thomas, who'd taken her home 6 times now, who always greeted her politely without the pity she'd learned to expect. "Ms. Hart." He was out of the car, opening the back door. "Mr. DeLuca asked me to bring you to him." "I can't..." But she was already moving toward the car, some part of her needing to see Marco, to hear him say this was manageable, that her past wouldn't destroy whatever fragile thing they were building. The drive to his office building passed in a blur. Lena stared at her phone, watching the article spread across social media, watching her name trend alongside Marco's, watching her life become public spectacle. Someone had found her wedding photos. Her and Jonathan, young and smiling and so naive. Someone else had found court documents from the divorce. Every intimate detail of her humiliation, packaged for entertainment. She wanted to disappear, wanted to crawl back into invisibility and never emerge. But the car was already pulling up to a building she'd never been to before. Sleek glass and steel in the financial district. The kind of place where deals worth millions happened before lunch. Thomas guided her through a private entrance, into an elevator that required a key card, and suddenly she was on the top floor being ushered into an office that overlooked half the city. Marco stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, his posture rigid in a way she'd never seen. When he caught sight of her, he ended the call mid-sentence and crossed the space in 3 long strides. "Are you all right?" His hands framed her face, tilting it up so he could examine her like he was checking for injuries. "Am I all right?" Lena's voice cracked on a laugh that held no humor. "Did you see what they wrote about me? About us?" "I saw it." His jaw tightened. "I'm handling it." "Handling it how? You can't unpublish an article. You can't make people forget they saw my entire history laid out like evidence of my failures." "Lena, they called me a gold digger, Marco. Said I'm using you to climb back into society. Said my ex-husband was smart to leave me." The words poured out, each one cutting deeper. And the worst part is some of it's true. I am broke. I am desperate. And being with you does change my circumstances, which makes everything they're saying look... Stop. Marco's voice cut through her spiral like a blade. Stop giving their narrative power over your truth. My truth doesn't matter. Perception matters. And the perception is that I'm some pathetic divorcee who latched onto the first rich man who noticed her. Then we changed the perception. How? Lena pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. How do we change what people think when the facts support their assumptions? I am with you. You are wealthy and powerful. I did lose everything in my divorce. Those aren't lies. Marco was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he moved to his desk, picked up a tablet, and handed it to her. Read this. It was a statement already drafted, ready for release. Lena's eyes scanned the words, her breath catching. Marco De Luca confirms relationship with Lena Hart, describes her as a remarkable woman whose intelligence and integrity are matched only by her strength. Any suggestion that Ms. Hart is motivated by financial gain demonstrates fundamental misunderstanding of her character. Ms. Hart has repeatedly declined offers of financial assistance, insisting on maintaining her independence. Her choice to build a relationship with me is exactly that, a choice made freely and with full agency. I consider myself fortunate that she's willing to take that risk. You can't release this, Lena whispered. Why not? Because it makes me sound like I matter, like I'm someone worth defending publicly. You are someone worth defending publicly. Marco took the tablet back, setting it aside. And I will defend you. From gossip sites, from your ex-husband if he decides to make this worse, from anyone who thinks they have the right to dissect your life for entertainment. This is what I was afraid of. Lena's voice shook. This exposure, this scrutiny, people looking at me again, judging me, finding me wanting. Let them look. Let them judge. Their opinions don't change who you actually are. Easy for you to say. You're used to this. You've been in the public eye your entire career. Yes. And I've learned that you can't control what people think or say. You can only control how much power you give it. He moved closer, his presence solid and grounding. I know this is terrifying. I know it feels like losing control. But running from it, hiding from it, that gives them the power, not you. Lena's phone buzzed again. Another text, another unknown number. She didn't look at it. There's more, Marco said quietly. Something you need to know before you see it elsewhere. Her stomach dropped. What? Your ex-husband gave an interview. It's scheduled to run this afternoon. Jonathan? The name felt foreign in her mouth. Why would he? Because he saw an opportunity. The article mentioned him briefly, said he'd remarried. Apparently, he reached out to the same gossip site offering his perspective on your marriage, your character, and why things ended the way they did. Rage flooded through Lena, hot and clean and clarifying. He doesn't get to do that. He doesn't get to rewrite history now that I'm visible again. No, he doesn't, which is why my legal team is currently discussing options with the publication. But Lena, you need to prepare yourself. If they run it, if Jonathan says what I think he's going to say, let me guess. I was difficult, demanding, pushed him away, made it impossible for him to stay faithful. She'd heard the narrative before, whispered at the country club, implied in pitying looks from former friends. He's been telling that story for 2 years. At least now I get to hear it directly instead of through gossip. You don't have to face this alone. Don't I? This is my past, Marco. My mess. You shouldn't have to clean it up. His hands gripped her shoulders, firm enough to ground her. When someone I care about is being attacked, it becomes my concern. That's not negotiable. Why? The question burst out of her, desperate and raw. Why are you doing this? We've known each other 3 weeks. Why risk your reputation, your business relationships, your peace, all of it, for someone like me? Marco's expression softened, something fierce and tender entering his eyes. Because in 3 weeks, you've been more real with me than most people manage in years. Because you challenge me. Because you refuse to perform or pretend or shape yourself into what you think I want. And because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to want something beyond power and control and winning. Lena felt tears threaten. I'm going to disappoint you. Probably. I'll disappoint you too. That's what happens when things are real instead of perfect. His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped. But I'd rather have real and complicated than perfect and empty. Before Lena could respond, Marco's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened. I need to take this. It's my attorney. She nodded, moving to the window while he answered. Below, the city sprawled in all directions. Millions of people living millions of lives. And somewhere among them was Jonathan, preparing to tell the world his version of their marriage. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something else building beneath the fear. Anger, yes, but also determination. She'd spent 18 months invisible, letting Jonathan's narrative stand unchallenged because challenging it meant being seen again, meant being vulnerable to judgment and pity and all the things she'd been running from. But maybe Marco was right. Maybe hiding gave their lies more power than the truth ever could. They're running it, Marco's voice cut through her thoughts. He'd ended the call, his expression grim. Jonathan's interview, in 2 hours. My legal team can't stop it without creating more attention, and the editor claims it's newsworthy given the public interest. What does he say? Lena's voice was steady, calmer than she felt. I don't have the full text, but according to my contact, he portrays himself as the victim, says you were controlling, that you suffocated him with demands for attention, that he found comfort elsewhere because you'd emotionally abandoned the marriage years before. The words hit like physical blows, each one landing in tender places she'd thought had scarred over. Lena closed her eyes, breathing through the pain. Because of course that's what Jonathan would say. Of course he'd rewrite their history to make himself the sympathetic figure, the misunderstood husband driven to infidelity by a wife who didn't appreciate him. He's going to talk about my career, she said quietly, about how I gave up graduate school to support his law practice. He'll spin it as me being resentful, as me holding it against him that I made that choice. Did you? Resent it? Every single day. The admission came out raw. But I never said anything because that's what good wives did. Sacrifice silently, support their husband's ambitions while burying their own. And now he gets to use my silence as proof that I was difficult. Marco moved behind her, his presence a solid warmth at her back. You don't have to accept his narrative. What choice do I have? You tell yours. His hand settled on her shoulders. You stop letting other people define your story. And say what? That I was naive enough to believe love meant sacrifice? That I gave up everything for a man who was sleeping with my best friend while I was planning his office parties? Bitterness crept into her voice. That sounds pathetic. It sounds human. It sounds like someone who loved fully and was betrayed for it. There's no shame in that, Lena. Tell that to the comment sections. I don't care about comment sections. I care about you believing your own truth instead of their distortions. Lena turned to face him, this man who'd somehow become essential in 3 weeks, who looked at her like she was worth defending even when she couldn't defend herself. What if I do this? What if I tell my side and it makes everything worse? What if people still don't believe me? Or worse, what if they do believe me and decide I'm even more pathetic for staying as long as I did? Then at least you'll know you stood up for yourself, that you refused to let Jonathan control the narrative about your own life. Marco's voice was gentle but unyielding. You've been invisible for 18 months because visibility felt dangerous. But maybe the real danger is staying silent while other people write your story. Lena's phone buzzed again. This time she looked at it. Her sister, finally. Just saw the news. Are you okay? Call me. The concern should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt like salt in a wound, because where had her sister been during the divorce? During the bankruptcy? During any of the moments when Lena had actually needed family instead of performative worry, now that she was trending on social media? I can't talk to her, Lena said, declining the call. I can't handle her pity right now. Then don't. You don't owe anyone access just because they're family. She'll think I'm being difficult. Let her think whatever she wants. Your energy is finite. Spend it on people who've earned it. The simple permission to prioritize herself felt revolutionary. Lena had spent so long trying to be accommodating, trying to maintain relationships even when they cost more than they gave, that the idea of just saying no, of protecting her own peace, felt almost foreign. Jonathan's going to say I cut people off, she realized, that I isolated myself after the divorce, that I pushed everyone away. Did you? I stopped returning calls from people who only wanted gossip. I stopped attending events where I'd be pitied or judged. I stopped performing the role of tragically divorced woman who needed saving. She met Marco's eyes. So yes, I guess I did push people away, but they weren't people who actually cared about me. They were people who cared about the drama. Then you made the right choice. Protecting yourself isn't the same as being difficult, no matter how Jonathan tries to frame it. Marco's phone rang again and again. The office line lit up with calls from journalists, from business associates, from people who apparently needed his comment on the scandal. He ignored them all, his focus remaining on Lena. You should answer those, she said. You have a business to run, relationships to maintain. I'm already causing problems. You're not causing anything. The media circus is causing problems. And those calls can wait until I know you're okay. I'm not okay. The admission came out small. I thought I could handle this. Thought I was stronger than I was 2 years ago. But seeing everything laid out like that, seeing Jonathan preparing to destroy me again publicly, I just want to disappear. Want to go back to being invisible where none of this can touch me. I know, and if you need to step back, if you need space from me to make that happen, I'll understand. Lena looked up sharply. Is that what you want? What I want is irrelevant. This is your life, your choice. I won't pressure you to stay visible if visibility is destroying you. But you'd let me go, if I asked. I'd hate it. I'd try to change your mind, but yes, ultimately, I'd respect your decision. Marco's expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. I told you from the beginning, this has to be your choice. That hasn't changed. Lena studied him, this powerful man offering her an exit she hadn't asked for, giving her control even though she could see it cost him. And something shifted inside her, something that had been frozen and frightened since the moment she'd seen that article. No, she said quietly. No, I'm not running. I'm not going back to being invisible because Jonathan decided to weaponize my past. She straightened her shoulders, feeling something like resolve settle into her bones. I'm tired of letting him win, tired of letting fear control my choices, tired of giving other people's opinions more weight than my own truth. Marco's expression transformed, pride and relief and something fiercer flickering across his features. You're sure? I'm terrified, but I'm sure. Lena took a shaky breath. What do we do? We start by releasing my statement. Establish that you're not some desperate gold digger, that our relationship is genuine and based on mutual respect. That's not enough. Jonathan's going to paint me as the villain in our marriage. People will believe him because he's charming and successful, and you're what? I'm the ex-wife working minimum wage. I'm the one who looks like I have something to gain. Then we give you a platform to tell your side. Not reactive, not defensive. Just truth. Lena laughed, but it came out bitter. Who's going to care about my truth when Jonathan's lies are more entertaining? I know someone. Journalist I trust. She focuses on long-form pieces about power dynamics and systemic issues. She'd be interested in your story, not the gossip angle, but the reality of what happens to women after high-profile divorces. How the narrative gets weaponized. How society treats women who fall from grace. I don't want to be a case study. You wouldn't be. You'd be a person taking control of your own narrative. But Lena, it has to be your choice. I can open the door, but you have to decide if you want to walk through it. Lena moved to the window again, looking out at the city that had witnessed her rise and fall and invisible survival. Somewhere down there, Jonathan was preparing to tell everyone she was difficult, demanding, impossible to love. And she could let him, could retreat back into invisibility and let his lies stand unchallenged, or she could fight. Set up the interview, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. But I want to read Jonathan's piece first. Want to know exactly what I'm responding to. It might make you angry. Good. I could use some anger right now. Fear hasn't been particularly useful. Marco made a call, speaking in low tones to someone named Rebecca, while Lena tried to process what she'd just agreed to. A public interview. Her story, told on her terms. It felt simultaneously empowering and terrifying. 20 minutes later, Marco's assistant delivered a printed copy of Jonathan's interview. Lena took it with trembling hands and forced herself to read every word. It was worse than she'd imagined. Jonathan portrayed himself as a devoted husband, driven to desperate measures by a wife who'd become cold and withdrawn. He claimed Lena had resented his success, had blamed him for her abandoned academic career, even though he'd supported her choice to focus on their home life. He painted their marriage as loveless by the end, implied that his affair was almost understandable, given how emotionally unavailable she'd become. And then, in a move that made Lena's blood boil, he expressed concern for her current situation, worried that she was being taken advantage of by powerful men who might not have her best interests at heart. Suggested that perhaps she needed professional help to process the trauma of their divorce, instead of rushing into new relationships. He positioned himself as the caring ex-husband, Lena said, her voice shaking with rage. Worried about my well-being while simultaneously destroying my credibility. It's a calculated move. Makes him look sympathetic while undermining anything you might say in response. People are going to believe him. He's a successful attorney. You're a woman who survived betrayal and rebuilt her life from nothing. That takes more strength than he'll ever possess. Marco took the pages from her hands, setting them aside. And we're going to make sure people understand that. How? By being smarter than he is. By not playing his game. Marco's eyes glinted with something sharp and strategic. Jonathan wants you to look desperate and defensive. So we do the opposite. We make you look strong and self-possessed. We tell your story without mentioning him more than necessary. We make it about you reclaiming your narrative, not about punishing him for his lies. I want to punish him for his lies. I know, and we will. But not by screaming into the void, by being so clearly truthful that his lies become obvious in contrast. Lena paced the office, adrenaline and anger coursing through her. When can we do the interview? Rebecca can meet tomorrow if you're ready. It would run early next week. Give us time to craft the piece properly. That gives Jonathan's version almost a week to spread unchallenged. It also gives us time to do this right, to make sure you're comfortable with what you're sharing, how you're sharing it. Marco caught her arm gently, stopping her pacing. This isn't a race. It's not about responding fastest. It's about responding best. He was right. Lena knew he was right. But the thought of Jonathan's lies spreading while she waited felt like swallowing glass. What do I do until then? People are calling me a gold digger right now. People are reading his interview and deciding I'm everything he says I am. You live your life. You go to work, you come home, you don't read the comments. Marco pulled her closer. And you let me handle the noise while you focus on your truth. I don't want you fighting my battles. I'm not fighting your battles. I'm protecting what's mine while you prepare to fight them yourself. His hand cupped her face. There's a difference. What's yours? The question came out soft. You. If you'll let me claim you. Lena's breath caught. They'd been building toward this, toward something beyond casual dating, beyond testing waters, but hearing it stated so baldly made it real in a way that terrified her. I'm a mess, she whispered. My life is a disaster. I come with baggage and debt and an ex-husband who apparently won't let me move on in peace. I don't want perfection. I want you. You might regret that. Let me worry about my regrets. Marco's thumb traced her lower lip. Right now I need to know you're with me, that you trust me to protect you while you find your strength. I'm with you, Lena said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. I'm terrified and furious and completely out of my depth, but I'm with you. He kissed her then, fierce and claiming, like he could seal the promise with touch, and Lena kissed him back, pouring 18 months of loneliness and 3 weeks of hope and right now's terror into it, letting herself be held by someone who looked at her and saw value instead of damage. When they finally broke apart, Marco rested his forehead against hers. We're going to get through this. Together. Promise? I promise. And I keep my promises. Lena wanted to believe him, needed to believe that this time, this man, this moment was different from everything that had come before, that being seen wouldn't end in destruction, that vulnerability might actually be met with protection instead of exploitation. What happens now? She asked. Now we release my statement. Tomorrow you meet with Rebecca and decide what you want to share. And in the meantime, Marco's expression turned cold in a way that reminded her exactly who she was dealing with. I make some calls. Remind certain people that there are consequences for attacking what's mine. Marco, I'm not going to hurt anyone, but I'm going to make sure Jonathan understands that his little publicity stunt comes with a price. He doesn't get to destroy you for entertainment without consequences. Part of Lena wanted to object, to insist she could handle this herself. But a larger part, the part that was exhausted from carrying everything alone for 18 months, felt relief at letting someone else shoulder the weight. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing me. For choosing to fight for me even when it would be easier to walk away. Marco's expression softened. Walking away from you was never an option, not from the moment I saw you trying to disappear in that ballroom. I wasn't very good at it, apparently. No, you were terrible. You stood out like a beacon. His smile held warmth and something darker. And I've never been good at resisting things that call to me. They spent the rest of the afternoon in his office while Marco made calls and Lena tried not to think about what was being said about her online. His attorney visited, explaining legal options for handling defamation if Jonathan crossed certain lines. His publicist drafted the statement that would be released within the hour, positioning Marco and Lena's relationship as genuine and serious. And through it all, Marco kept her close, a hand on her back, fingers laced with hers, his presence constant and grounding, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let her go. Maybe he was right to worry. The urge to run, to hide, to return to safety of invisibility thrummed beneath her skin, but every time she considered it, she remembered his words. The walls weren't protecting me. They were ensuring I'd never have to risk being alive again. She was so tired of half living. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet, Lena made a decision, not just to stay visible, not just to fight back against Jonathan's lies, but to actually, finally, start living again. To reclaim not just her narrative, but her entire self, the dreams she'd buried, the ambitions she'd abandoned, the woman she'd been before she learned to shrink. It would be hard, terrifying, probably painful in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But standing in Marco's office, his arms around her, and the city glowing below, Lena thought maybe, just maybe, she was ready. Ready to be seen, ready to be known, ready to believe that this time visibility wouldn't end in destruction, ready to discover who she could become when she stopped hiding. And as Marco's phone buzzed with confirmation that the statement had been released, as her own phone lit up with new notifications that she refused to check, Lena closed her eyes and let herself hope. Not for rescue, not for someone to fix her, but for the strength to fix herself, with someone strong enough to stand beside her while she did, The interview with Rebecca Chen happened in Marco's penthouse on a Wednesday morning, sunlight streaming through those floor-to-ceiling windows, while Lena sat on the leather sofa trying not to let her hands shake. Rebecca was younger than Lena expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a gentle demeanor that somehow made the truth easier to speak. She'd built her reputation on long-form journalism that exposed systemic inequities, and when Marco had called in the favor, she'd agreed immediately. "I'm not interested in gossip," Rebecca said, setting up her recording device on the coffee table between them. "I want to understand what happens to women after high-profile divorces. How the narrative gets weaponized. How you survive when the world decides you're the villain." Lena took a breath, Marco's presence solid beside her even though he'd offered to leave. She'd asked him to stay, needed him to stay. "I married Jonathan Hart when I was 23, Lena began, and the story poured out. Not the sanitized version she'd told herself for years, but the truth. How she'd abandoned her graduate program in art history because Jonathan's law career demanded a supportive wife. How she'd convinced herself that sacrifice was love, that being needed was the same as being valued. How she'd spent 15 years performing the role of perfect spouse while losing herself piece by piece. "When did you find out about the affair?" Rebecca asked gently. "At a charity gala. I saw them together, Jonathan and Melissa, my best friend, and the way they looked at each other made everything suddenly, horribly clear." Lena's voice steadied as she spoke. "I confronted him that night. He didn't deny it, just said he'd been unhappy for years, that I'd become distant, that Melissa understood him in ways I never had." "How long had it been going on?" 3 years. 3 years of him coming home to me, sleeping in our bed, making plans for our future, all while building a separate life with her." Rebecca's pen moved across her notepad. "And the divorce?" "He had better attorneys, more money, connections I didn't have anymore because I'd let all my professional relationships atrophy while supporting his career." Lena felt Marco's hand find hers, squeezing gently. "I got almost nothing. The prenup his family insisted on meant I had no claim to his earnings, no alimony because I couldn't prove I'd sacrificed career advancement, even though I literally had acceptance letters to PhD programs I'd turned down for him." "So you went from society wife to invisible." "I worked 3 jobs just to keep a studio apartment, catering, dry cleaning, whatever I could find that didn't require me to explain the gap in my resume." Lena met Rebecca's eyes. "And I was fine with being invisible. It felt safer than being seen and judged, safer than risking being hurt again. Until Marco. Lena glanced at him, found him watching her with an intensity that still made her breath catch. "He saw me when I was trying hardest to disappear, and instead of letting me hide, he kept showing up, kept insisting I was worth more than I'd been told." Rebecca turned to Marco. "Why Lena? You could have anyone. Why pursue someone so clearly trying to avoid attention?" Marco's answer came without hesitation. "Because everyone else was performing. Lena was real, and I'd spent 4 years surrounded by people who wanted something from me. She was the first person in longer than I could remember who just wanted to be left alone." His mouth quirked. "Naturally, I couldn't allow that." Despite everything, Lena smiled. The interview continued for 2 hours, Rebecca asking careful questions that drew out not just the facts, but the emotional truth of Lena's journey. How it felt to be erased from a life she'd built. How invisibility became both prison and protection. How terrifying it was to be seen again, to trust again, to risk believing that this time might be different. "Jonathan's interview paints you as cold, withdrawn, resentful," Rebecca said finally. "How do you respond to that characterization?" Lena had prepared for this question, but the answer still came from somewhere deep and raw. "I was all those things by the end, because I'd spent 15 years making myself smaller so he could be bigger. I'd silenced my opinions so his could dominate. I'd abandoned my dreams so his could flourish. And yes, eventually I became resentful. Eventually I withdrew. But that wasn't the cause of our marriage failing. It was the symptom of me slowly suffocating in a relationship where only one person's needs mattered." "Do you blame him for the affair?" "I blame him for lying, for making me believe our marriage was worth sacrificing for while he was already building an exit strategy. For letting me think I was the problem when the real problem was that he wanted someone who would never challenge him, never grow beyond who he needed her to be. Lena's voice was steady now, certain. Melissa was perfect for that. She still is. And I hope they're very happy together in their world where women exist to enhance men's lives rather than build their own. Rebecca's pen stilled. That's going to make waves. Good. I'm tired of being quiet, so other people stay comfortable. When the interview ended, Rebecca packed up her equipment with a thoughtful expression. This will run Monday. I'll send you the draft Friday for approval. Anything you want changed or removed, just say so. Thank you, Lena said, for treating this like it matters. It does matter. Women like Jonathan's narrative destroy lives every day. The more we expose that pattern, the harder it becomes to maintain. Rebecca shook Marco's hand, then Lena's. You're braver than you think. After she left, Lena collapsed against the sofa, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical. Marco pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her like he could shield her from whatever came next. How do you feel? He asked. Terrified. Exposed. Like I just handed the world ammunition to destroy me with. Or like you just took control of your own story. Maybe both. Lena turned her face into his shoulder. What if people don't believe me? What if they still think I'm the villain? Then they're wrong. And their being wrong doesn't change your truth. They stayed like that while the city moved below them, while Lena's phone continued buzzing with messages she refused to check, while the afternoon light shifted and changed. And slowly, the terror receded enough for something else to emerge. Not quite peace, but maybe the beginning of it. The sense that she'd done something for herself instead of to protect herself. The weekend passed in a strange suspension. Marco kept Lena close, taking her to his properties, showing her the neighborhoods he was transforming, introducing her to people who treated her like she mattered instead of like she was a scandal. And gradually, Lena began to remember what it felt like to take up space, to have opinions, to exist beyond survival mode. On Friday, Rebecca's draft arrived. Lena read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face because Rebecca had captured everything. Not just the facts, but the emotional truth of what it meant to be erased and then slowly, painfully rebuilt. The piece didn't attack Jonathan, didn't need to. It simply told Lena's story with such clear-eyed honesty that his lies became obvious in contrast. It's perfect, Lena told Rebecca over the phone. Don't change anything. You're sure? Once this runs, there's no taking it back. I'm sure. Let them see who I actually am instead of who they've decided I must be. The article published Monday at 6 a.m., and by 8 a.m., Lena's phone had exploded. But this time the messages were different. Women she'd never met sharing their own stories of divorce and erasure. Former acquaintances apologizing for believing Jonathan's version without question. Even a few of her graduate school professors reaching out, saying they'd always wondered what happened to their most promising student. The public response split predictably. Some still defended Jonathan, claimed Lena was playing victim, insisted she was manipulating Marco for money. But more people, far more than Lena had dared hope, saw through the noise to the truth. Saw a woman who'd survived systematic erasure and found the strength to rebuild. By Tuesday, Jonathan's attorney released a statement claiming Lena's interview was defamatory and threatening legal action. Marco's legal team responded within an hour with documentation of every claim Lena had made. The prenup, the divorce settlement, the acceptance letters to graduate programs, even emails from that period showing Jonathan encouraging her to decline the PhD offers. We're not just defending you, Marco explained as they reviewed the response. We're making it very clear that any further attacks will be met with evidence he doesn't want public. What evidence? Marco's expression went cold in that way that reminded her exactly who she was dealing with. Let's just say Jonathan's professional conduct isn't as pristine as he likes to portray. And if he pushes this, if he tries to drag you through court, every questionable billing practice and ethical violation is going to become part of the public record. You investigated him. I protect what's mine. That means knowing exactly what ammunition exists and being prepared to use it. He cupped her face. He doesn't get to hurt you again, Lena. Not while I'm here. The legal threat dissolved by Thursday. Jonathan's team went silent, and the gossip cycle moved on to fresher scandals. But the impact of Lena's interview lingered. Women's advocacy groups reached out asking her to speak at events. A publisher inquired about a book. Opportunities emerged from visibility instead of just vulnerability. And through it all, Marco was there. Not controlling, not managing, but present. Offering guidance when she asked for it and stepping back when she needed space. Showing her what partnership looked like when both people were equally invested. 3 weeks after the interview published, Lena stood in the artist loft Marco had offered her months ago. The space no longer felt like a gift she couldn't accept, but like a possibility she was finally ready to claim. She'd enrolled in an online art history program, reaching out to her former professors who'd welcomed her back with enthusiasm. The debt still existed, the past still carried weight, but neither defined her anymore. "You're moving in?" Marco asked from the doorway, watching her arrange books on shelves she'd installed herself. Slowly, keeping my apartment for now, but using this space to work, to study, to remember who I wanted to be before I learned to disappear. Lena turned to face him. "Is that okay?" "It's more than okay. It's exactly what I hoped for when I kept this unit empty." "You really did that? Held it for me when you barely knew me?" "I knew enough, knew you needed space to become yourself again, even if you didn't know it yet." He moved into the loft, pulling her against him. And I was willing to wait however long it took. Lena rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I still have bad days. Days when I want to hide again. When visibility feels too dangerous." "I know. And on those days, I'll be here. Reminding you that being seen doesn't mean being destroyed. That you're allowed to take up space." His hand stroked her hair. "But Lena, the choice is always yours. If you need to step back, if you need invisibility sometimes, that's okay too. As long as you're choosing it instead of defaulting to it out of fear." "How did you get so wise about this?" 2 years of therapy after my wife died. Turns out grief and trauma require actual processing, not just expensive distractions. His voice held wry humor. "Who knew?" Lena pulled back enough to see his face. "Do you still miss her?" "Every day. But missing her doesn't mean I can't build something new with you. Love isn't finite, remember? It expands to hold what we let it hold." "I'm falling in love with you." The words emerged quietly, but Lena didn't take them back. Didn't minimize or qualify. Just let the truth exist between them. Marco's expression transformed, something fierce and tender flooding his features. "I know. I've been falling in love with you since you left my business card on that bar, because you were too stubborn to accept what I was offering. I thought you were offering a transaction. I was offering a possibility. You just weren't ready to see it yet." He kissed her, slow and deep and certain. "But you see it now." "I see it now," Lena agreed, "and I'm terrified and hopeful and completely out of my depth. But I'm choosing this, choosing you, choosing visibility, even though it's scary. That's all I need, you, choosing us, every day." They stood in that empty loft that would slowly become filled with Lena's dreams, holding each other while the city glowed beyond the windows. And Lena felt something shift inside her, not healing exactly, but transformation. The woman who'd been erased was gone. The woman who'd survived through invisibility was fading, and in their place, someone new was emerging, someone stronger, someone who'd learned that being seen wasn't the same as being destroyed. That vulnerability could be met with protection instead of exploitation. That falling didn't have to mean shattering if someone was there to catch you. 6 months later, Lena defended her dissertation proposal to a committee that remembered her from a decade ago and welcomed her back with genuine enthusiasm. Marco sat in the back of the room, watching with the same intensity he'd shown that first night when he'd refused to let her disappear. And when she finished, when the committee approved her proposal and congratulated her on her return to academia, he was the first person she looked for. "How does it feel?" he asked as they walked through campus, her hand in his. "Like I'm reclaiming parts of myself I thought were dead." Lena squeezed his fingers. "Like I'm building a life instead of just surviving one." "Good, because you deserve a life worth living, not just enduring." They'd navigated the past 6 months carefully, learning each other's wounds and walls, discovering how to be together without losing themselves. Marco had introduced her to his world, the business dinners and charity events and political functions, but always with the understanding that she could decline, could choose invisibility when visibility became too much. And Lena had slowly built her own world. Friends from her graduate program, colleagues from her research, a community that valued her mind instead of her status. Sometimes they overlapped. Sometimes they stayed separate. And that was okay, because partnership didn't mean merger. It meant two whole people choosing to build something together. I got an email from Jonathan, Lena mentioned as they reached Marco's car. His expression went carefully neutral. What did he want? To apologize, apparently. Said he'd been reflecting on our marriage, on how he'd handled things, and wanted to make amends. Lena's voice was calm, detached. Said he hoped we could find peace. How do you feel about that? I feel nothing, and that's the victory, I think. He doesn't have power over me anymore. His apology doesn't change what happened, and I don't need it to move forward. She looked up at Marco. I've already moved forward, with or without his permission. You're remarkable. You know that? I'm just someone who refused to stay broken. But Lena smiled, because she was starting to believe it. Starting to see herself the way Marco saw her, not as damaged or difficult, but as strong and resilient and worth knowing. The wedding happened on a Tuesday in October, small and private in Marco's penthouse, with only the people who truly mattered. Not a performance, not a statement, just two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their pasts and decided to build a future together. Lena wore a simple dress the color of champagne, not because it was traditional, but because she'd chosen it herself without considering anyone else's opinion. Her sister had offered to help plan, to invite extended family, to turn it into the kind of event society expected from Marco De Luca's wedding. Lena had politely declined. This is for us, she'd said, not for performance, not for other people's expectations. Just us. And Marco had agreed without hesitation, because he understood. Because he'd spent 4 years performing strength while dying inside, and he was done with performances too. The ceremony was brief, promises spoken without pretense, rings exchanged without fanfare. When they kissed, as the officiant declared them married, Lena felt something click into place. Not completion, because she'd learned she didn't need someone else to complete her, but alignment, the sense of two people choosing to face the world together instead of alone. Mrs. De Luca, Marco murmured against her lips. Dr. Hart De Luca, if you don't mind, Lena corrected with a smile. I'm keeping my name professionally. I've earned it. Fair enough. Dr. Hart De Luca it is. They celebrated with dinner cooked by Marco himself, the same pasta he'd made that first night in his kitchen when Lena had started believing that maybe, possibly, she could trust again. And as they ate and talked and laughed with the handful of people who'd witnessed their vows, Lena realized she'd stopped performing entirely, stopped shaping herself to fit others' expectations, stopped apologizing for taking up space. She was just herself, complicated and strong and still healing, and that was enough. Later, alone in their bedroom with the city lights spreading below them like fallen stars, Marco pulled her close. Any regrets? He asked. About marrying you? Not even one. About everything else? The visibility, the scrutiny, the way our relationship became public spectacle before we were ready? Lena considered the question seriously. I regret that it was forced on us, that we didn't get to choose the timing, but I don't regret what came from it. I don't regret finding my voice again. Don't regret reclaiming my story. She traced the line of his jaw. And I definitely don't regret you refusing to let me disappear. I couldn't let you disappear. You were too bright, even when you were trying to dim yourself. I wasn't bright. I was broken. You were both. And the brightness was what drew me in, even when you couldn't see it yourself. They made love slowly, tenderly, two people who'd learned that intimacy meant vulnerability, and vulnerability required trust. And afterward, wrapped in each other with the night quiet around them, Lena felt peace settle into her bones. Not the peace of having arrived, but the peace of knowing she was on the right path, with the right person, building the right life. Thank you, she whispered into the darkness. For what? For seeing me when I needed to be invisible, for insisting I was worth more than I believed, for being patient while I learned to trust again. Marco's arms tightened around her. Thank you for taking the risk, for choosing visibility even when it terrified you, for believing that this time could be different. It is different. You're different. We're different together. That's what matters. And it was true. Separately, they'd both survived tragedy and trauma. Separately, they'd both learned to protect themselves through walls and control. But together, they'd discovered something neither had expected, that healing didn't require perfection, that partnership didn't mean losing yourself, that love could be both fierce and gentle, protective and freeing. The woman who'd been invisible was gone. The man who'd controlled everything had softened, and in their place stood two people who'd chosen each other with full knowledge of the risks, the scars, the complications. Two people who'd learned that being seen, truly, deeply seen, wasn't dangerous when you were seen by someone who valued what they found. Two people who'd survived by hiding and discovered they could thrive by being known. As Lena drifted towards sleep, Marco's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From that gala where she'd tried so hard to disappear, through the terror of exposure and the pain of being vulnerable again, to this moment of quiet certainty. She'd been invisible for 18 months, convinced that safety lay in not being seen. She'd been wrong. Safety didn't come from hiding. It came from being known by someone who chose to protect rather than exploit that knowledge. From building a life that was authentically hers, instead of performing one that met others' expectations. From believing, finally, fully believing, that she was worth the space she occupied, the dreams she pursued, the love she'd found. Jonathan had tried to erase her, and for a while she'd let him succeed. But Marco had seen her, had insisted she was worth seeing. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, Lena had learned to see herself that way too. Not as the discarded wife, not as the invisible server, not as the woman too damaged to deserve good things. Just as Lena, complicated and strong and still learning. Dr. Lena Hart DeLuca, who'd survived erasure and chose visibility, who'd been broken and chose healing, who'd learned that falling in love didn't mean losing yourself, not if you fell towards someone who helped you become more of who you actually were. The city glittered beyond their windows, millions of lights representing millions of lives. And somewhere in that vast, complicated world, other women were learning to be invisible, convinced it was safer than being seen. Other people were building walls instead of bridges, choosing protection over connection. Lena hoped they'd find their way back to themselves the way she had. Hoped they'd encounter someone who refused to let them disappear. Hoped they'd discover that visibility, while terrifying, was also how you found your way home to yourself. But if they didn't, if they stayed hidden, stayed safe, stayed small, she understood that too. Because she'd lived it, had survived through invisibility until she was strong enough to risk being seen. The difference was, she wasn't invisible anymore. She was known. She was loved. She was exactly, completely, beautifully herself. And that was worth every moment of fear it had taken to get here. In Marco's arms, surrounded by the life they were building together, Lena finally let go of the last remnants of the woman who'd tried to disappear. Let her dissolve into the darkness like smoke, remembered but no longer defining. In her place remained someone stronger, someone who'd learned that the bravest thing wasn't surviving invisibility, it was choosing to be seen anyway. And as sleep pulled her under, Lena smiled. Because the woman who'd become invisible had finally, irrevocably, become visible again. And this time, she intended to stay that way.